Ladies and gentlemen, this is TVP World. I'm your host Benjamin Lee, and welcome aboard the Eastern Express. Now, in this episode, we're turning our eyes to a burgeoning alliance that's reshaping Central Asia, Turkey and Uzbekistan. That's right, folks, it's time to talk about the Organization of Turkish States, a regional alliance that's bringing Turkey and Uzbekistan closer together with some additional interest from Saudi Arabia. But let's not forget the broader implications. In a world where geopolitical tensions are high, having strong economic allies is like having an ace up your sleeve. So, without further ado, let's take a look at our latest report to find out more.
Uzbekistan, under the leadership of President Mirziyoyev, has secured over $34 billion in investment projects with Turkey and Saudi Arabia. During President's official visit to Turkey, the two nations made substantial progress in strengthening their bilateral relations. The third meeting of the Uzbek-Turkish Strategic Cooperation Council, along with discussions with top business leaders, resulted in the formation of more than 150 new projects valued at more than $10 billion. These projects cover a wide range of sectors, including industry, energy, mining, geology, transport, healthcare, and agriculture. Uzbekistan's investment cooperation with Saudi Arabia is also thriving, marketed by the initiation of several large-scale projects. An investment portfolio comprising 34 projects with a total value of more than $24 billion has been developed with Saudi partners. For the current year, $2.5 billion in investment will be utilized in numerous projects focusing on transport, digitalization, infrastructure, healthcare, and energy. The Uzbek-Saudi Business Council has been tasked with intensifying its activities, with the emphasis on finalizing negotiations and commencing work on new projects, valued at $6.5 billion in the fields of ecology, the mining industry, and financial cooperation. President Mirziyoyev has instructed responsible parties to ensure the comprehensive and high-quality development of foreign investments, emphasizing the importance of maintaining continuous dialogue with investors, creating favorable conditions for investment, and systematically addressing any challenges that arise during project implementation.
And now, let's take a look at the issue in greater detail. Historically, Turkey has struggled to extend its influence in Central Asia. For years, it was like trying to start a campfire in a rainstorm, frustrating and largely unsuccessful. But since 2016, when Uzbek President Mirziyoyev took the helm, things have changed. Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan's AK party has pivoted from an Islamic focus on the Middle East to a more secular nationalist agenda aiming to bolster Turkey's status as a regional power. Turkey and Uzbekistan, with populations of 85 million and 35 million respectively, are the heavyweights in the Turkic world. Together, they account for the majority of the 165 million people in Turkic majority states. Unlike resource-dependent Azerbaijan and Kazakhstan, Turkey and Uzbekistan boast diverse economies and formidable military capabilities. On the security front, the partnership has also strengthened. Both nations have conducted joint military exercises and signed numerous agreements on military education and intelligence cooperation. The instability in Afghanistan, especially after the US withdrawal and the Taliban's takeover, has driven the five stands closer together out of mutual interest. The rising geopolitical tensions between Russia, China, and the West have further united these countries, leading to a multi-vector foreign policy where they navigate between the interests of global heavyweights. Russia's influence in the region remains significant. It recently reversed the flow of Soviet-era gas pipelines to provide Uzbekistan with 12 billion cubic meters of gas per year, alleviating the republic's energy crisis. However, Mirziyoyev has been careful to keep Russia at arm's length, balking at creating a Central Asian gas hub together with Kazakhstan that Russian President Vladimir Putin was pushing for. Instead, Uzbekistan has diversified its investments, turning to countries like Qatar and indeed Saudi Arabia for investments in its energy sector. The Turkic world is once again a strategic hotspot, enjoying importance it hasn't seen since the Victorian-era Great Game. Putin's long-term plans include building new gas export infrastructure to the south and east, potentially transforming Central Asia into a major transit route for Russian gas to Asia. Now, this would benefit all countries in the region, but it also means navigating complex international relations with Iran, China, and the broader global community. The burgeoning relationship between Turkey and Uzbekistan have revitalized Turkic cooperation, paving the way for a robust partnership. So, as Turkey and Uzbekistan continue to build this strategic partnership, we can expect to see even more developments in economic ties and security cooperation. This cooperation is set to enhance Uzbekistan's structure as a significant middle power in Central Asia and solidify Turkey's influence in the region. And now, here to shed more light on the issue is Bruce Penier, journalist at Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty. Hello, sir, and welcome to Eastern Express.
Thank you.
So we're looking at Uzbekistan, which has secured $34.2 billion in investment project with Turkey and Saudi Arabia. What are some of the key sectors that these investment do you think they're targeting, and how do you think that they'll impact Uzbekistan's economic landscape?
Well, I mean, the one thing that both these countries have in common when they're investing in Uzbekistan is they're looking for trade corridors, and they're trying to help expand those. So in both cases, I mean, in the case of Turkey, of course, it's more middle corridor. That's Uzbekistan transporting goods west or receiving goods from the west headed east. And in Saudi Arabia's case, it's south. And both those are attractive to Uzbekistan, as you can imagine. Sanctions on the so-called northern route that goes through Russia have really crippled a lot of efforts to maintain trade with, certainly with Europe. But it's also reminded everyone in Central Asia, Uzbekistan in particular, that there are other options besides east-west trade, and they can finally take advantage of these southern routes that have for a long time really been just too complicated to deal with. So it really does help that Saudi Arabia's stepped up, so to speak, and is helping them with that route also.
And traditionally, Turkey and Uzbekistan haven't really been that warm with each other, but recent kind of high-level strategic discussions sort of changed that. Can you help us understand what are the factors that has changed throughout these years?
Well, I mean, this goes back obviously to the early days of Uzbekistan's independence. Now, one of the things that Uzbekistan did not appreciate was that they sent students to Saudi Arabia, they sent students to Turkey. Turkey in the 1990s, and a lot of them studied religion, Gulenist, but other schools too. And when the Uzbek authorities found out that that's what they were studying, they recalled all of them. So there's been a problem since then. And after that, of course, they just had a hard time doing business together. There was a couple fairly large businesses in Uzbekistan, and then the Turkish owners had invested a lot of money, and Uzbekistan essentially just threw them out one day and without any kind of compensation. That was obviously, that's years ago. We're talking 20, 25 years ago when all this happened. But it's taken them that long to come back around and finally patch up ties. Credit to President Erdogan in Turkey. He has been trying to really energize this organization of Turkic states. Underlining reasons for this are both trade and security, of course, too, because Turkey is becoming a larger supplier of arms to all the Central Asian governments, but also to Uzbekistan.
Right. Meanwhile, it's hard to not talk about Uzbekistan without the involvement of China and Russia. So I'm also wondering, how will this established relationship between Turkey, Saudi Arabia, and Uzbekistan impact the geopolitical relationship and kind of all the intricacies with the involvement of China and Russia?
That's a good question, and you kind of have to separate the two. Now, in Russia's case, the big problem here is that one, Turkey is, as I mentioned, supplying arms. Now, Russia has been the traditional arms supplier to Central Asia, so the fact that Turkey is kind of moving in and taking away some of their market is a little bit troubling to Moscow. Also the trade route that I mentioned too. I mean, clearly the Kremlin would prefer that Uzbekistan stayed with the northern corridor as much as possible. And the fact that Turkey is pushing this middle corridor to connect Europe to China, and it goes through Uzbekistan, is also something that Russia is displeased with. Now, in the case of China, the concern is a little bit different. China has, for the last 20 years, been something of the banker for Central Asia, we'll say. Most of the investments and a lot of the big projects that were built in Central Asia in the last 20, 25 years have been done with Chinese help or Chinese money. The Central Asians have incurred huge debts to China for these projects. So China is a little bit reluctant to spend a lot of money in Central Asia. And in any case, they've pretty much built everything that they want to out there. The whole purpose of Chinese investment was to bring Central Asian raw materials and resources to China. They've accomplished that: railroads, roads, pipelines. So the investment and the finances from China is not drying up, but certainly less than it was. So now you have Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia is stepping in. They're helping to fund a lot of the projects, especially the ones that are really needed today. Alternative energies, resources, solar, wind. China is the third largest investor in Uzbekistan now, like out of nowhere. They really stepped up and taken, made amazing progress in closing ties with Uzbekistan. It's not just Saudi Arabia, I should mention too. It's really the larger Arab world. So if you look at the Gulf Coordination Council, all those countries are heavily involved in Uzbekistan now, whereas they were hardly present just 5 or 6 years ago. So that Uzbekistan has essentially changed Chinese financing for Arab financing.
All right, let's examine this ripple effect a little bit more, because we do know that in the Central Asian region, there's always been a tug of war of influence between Russia and China. Do you think that the fact that Uzbekistan is turning away from these countries will be more impactful for one relationship over another and kind of upsetting the whole dynamic there?
I think in the case of China, it doesn't really matter so much to them because so much of this is trade, and China benefits from that because the routes that go through Central Asia leading to the Middle East and to Europe are something that China will directly benefit from. Now, in the Russian case, of course, this is a totally different situation. Russia would prefer that these countries did not have strong ties with other countries, even including China, let alone the strengthening ties that they're getting now with Turkey, with the Arab world. This is definitely to the detriment of Moscow, and plus the fact that they're helping open up these new trade routes that have nothing to do with Russia at all. Russia is trying to push its own north-south corridor, which would involve some of Central Asia, Kazakhstan, Turkmenistan, and Uzbekistan, and go through Afghanistan and Iran. But when I mention Afghanistan and Iran, you can already understand that there's some difficulties for a lot of investors and a lot of people interested in trade and having to deal with those two countries at the moment, either for infrastructure projects or in the case of Iran, also the political situation and the sanctions that Iran has on it itself. So Russia is probably the one that's the biggest loser of this these strengthening relations that Uzbekistan and other Central Asian countries have with partners that have been on the margins for a long time, for 20 or 30 years, but all of a sudden are becoming much closer and much stronger. And you can see that the momentum is building. So this is something that won't go away even after the war in Ukraine is over.
You mentioned other Central Asian countries, and I'm wondering how does that compare to Uzbekistan when it comes to dealing with Saudi Arabia, Turkey, and how does that affect the whole mix?
Uzbekistan is not an exporter of natural gas or oil at this point, right? Now, this is something that Turkey really wants for itself, but also because Turkey is looking to become a hub for gas and oil distribution, but really particularly for gas. So, Turkey's relationship with Turkmenistan, for instance, has become much closer lately. And in fact, they've even signed deals where Turkey and Azerbaijan have said we're ready to ship Turkmen gas to Europe. So anytime that you want to do that, so that that's something that Uzbekistan can't participate in at the moment. Actually, Uzbekistan is importing gas now for the first time in the last couple of years. They've stopped being an exporter, and now they're having to import because they have so many problems themselves. Kazakhstan, of course, has been looking for other routes for oil. 80% of its oil is exported through the Caspian Pipeline Consortium, which ends up in the Russian port at Black Sea port at Novorossiysk. There have been problems in getting that. The suspension of the port operations several times since Russia started its war in Ukraine. So Kazakhstan has been looking for alternative routes and been talking with both Turkey and Azerbaijan, and they have boosted their oil exports through Azerbaijan and into Turkey. But we have to really put this in perspective. The amount of oil that Kazakhstan has been exporting through the Russian port at Novorossiysk is 50 million tons or more a year, whereas the amount that they're exporting now through Azerbaijan and over to Turkey is maybe 3 million tons a year. It's growing, but obviously it just doesn't even compare to the amount that they're transporting through Russia. So it's a start, but they have a long way to go.
All right. Thank you so much for all your input and insight. Really needed help unpacking all this. So thank you again for being with us on Eastern Express. Appreciate it.
Hey, always a pleasure. Thank you very much.
And now we're moving on to the Eastern News Flash, a series of all the other stories from the East that you don't want to miss. Lithuania's Interior Ministry has put forward a proposal that could see dual citizens stripped of their Lithuanian citizenship if they are found supporting aggressor states. This legislative amendment to the law on citizenship comes as a response to the evolving geopolitical landscape.
The new proposal to Lithuania's law would restrict the ability of individuals deemed a threat to national security from acquiring or restoring Lithuanian citizenship. They would also broaden the grounds for revoking citizenship. Specifically, dual citizenship holders could lose their Lithuanian status if they threaten the security of the state, publicly support a foreign state that endangers the security interests of Lithuania, other EU member states and their allies, or engage in actions that contravene international legal norms. These measures follow last year's amendment of the same law, which allowed for the revocation of Lithuanian citizenship granted by exception to those who publicly support states posing a threat to Lithuania or its allies. This provision was notably applied to revoke the citizenship of Russian Ice dancer Margarita Drobiazko.
Russian energy giant Gazprom has reported a significant drop in its natural gas production. The most recent annual report presented the lowest figure recorded in this century and one of the lowest in many decades.
According to the company's annual report, Gazprom's output in 2023 plummeted to 360 billion cubic meters, a stark contrast to the almost 413 produced in the previous year. Despite the overall increase in Russian gas demand, which grew by 1.8% to almost 500 billion cubic meters, largely driven by a colder fourth quarter, Gazprom's market share in Russia fell to 57%, with only 215 billion cubic meters supplied to domestic consumers. Gazprom's strategic focus has shifted towards increasing sales to China and Central Asia, diversifying export routes, and expanding its liquefied natural gas production. This pivot comes in light of reduced sales volumes to Europe, which have rendered some of the company's extensive pipeline networks from Yamal-Nenets and Nadim-Purtas surplus to requirements.
The Baltic states have confirmed plans to disconnect their electrical grids from the Russian and Belarusian system in February 2025. This strategic decision marks the accumulation of a desynchronization process that has spanned nearly 2 decades.
The disconnection from the Russian grid is scheduled for February 8, 2025, with the subsequent connection to the continental European grid set for the following day. This transition was initially planned for the end of 2025, but has been expedited in light of the geopolitical shifts following Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine. Estonia's Deputy Secretary for Energy emphasized the importance of the move, stating that it will finalize the long-standing efforts to operate independently of the Brel system. The Baltic nations, which were integrated into the Soviet power network during World War II, are the only EU member states currently not connected to the continental European grid. The switch to the UCTE grid involves using Lithuania's existing Litpol electricity link with Poland and a new direct cable beneath the Baltic Sea. The total cost of the grid synchronization is estimated at 1.6 billion euros, with 3/4 of the funding provided by the European Union.
Uzbekistan is actively pursuing membership in the World Trade Organization. The Uzbek government, under President Shavkat Mirziyoyev, has initiated a series of comprehensive reform aimed at meeting the qualifications for membership.
The new reforms in Uzbekistan signal a willingness to relax the state's traditionally tight control over information flow, a key aspect of the broader economic liberalization efforts. This change is part of the recent presidential decree, which includes measures to align Uzbekistan's trade regulations with WTO standards. President Mirziyoyev has set an ambitious target for Uzbekistan to join the WTO by 2026. The country's accession process, which began in 1994, has seen renewed vigor with the submission of updated documents and intensified bilateral negotiations. The decree also outlines plans for the Ministry of Digital Technologies to develop procedures that would allow telecom operators and internet service providers to connect with international internet networks.
And that's all on this episode of Eastern Express. But for more news, update, and commentary, please stay tuned to TVP World.